Yeah, we're live.
Wonderful. Give it a few seconds as folks filter in. Already 10 watching. Millions going to be listening at home. Very excited to welcome everybody. So hello, my name is Chris Aviles. Welcome to the Gameplan for Education podcast, where we hope to elevate and explore the space where esports and education intersect. Really excited to launch this first episode. And have what I think is a really kind of neat story about what it is that we're going to talk about today, which is dramaturgy, gender dynamics, and dismantling toxicity in esports. Again, my name is Chris Aviles. I am a product evangelist for Gameplan, as well as a former educator here in the United States, and the president of Garden State Esports. And so today I am joined by Ms. Pia. Ms. Pia, how are you?
I'm doing amazing. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm fantastic. It's kind of neat how you wound up being the first guest is over at Gameplan. You're in charge of digital marketing and all the stuff we see on social media and the unbelievable blog posts. And they also asked you to moderate the Gameplan for Education podcast. But as we were getting to know each other, being new at Gameplan myself, I was so excited to hear and learn about how passionate you are, not just about gaming and esports, but your unbelievable research and background in, like we talked about, the place where esports and education intersect. And it was neat because we both came from, I think, the same place of wanting to use this podcast as a platform to shine a light and try to solve and talk about deep, meaningful things that matter in the world of gaming. And was just so excited to have somebody so passionate about inclusive gaming like myself. And so very quickly, your role evolved from moderator to guest to if I have my way, potentially a co-host, because I mean, Pia, your depth and breadth of knowledge and experience and background in this space, you have been doing some work, as somebody who I try to read a lot and stay up to different pieces of research. The things that you're tackling in your master's thesis, the things that you were producing, in your senior year of college, some of that is stuff that I haven't seen explored before. So tell the little folks about yourself and your journey into gaming and some of the work that you've been doing. That is really the topic of our first episode.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for the kind introduction and for your encouraging words. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Pınar, but I go by Pia because it's a lot easier to say, and I love going by Pia. It's my in-game nickname as well. But I do digital marketing at Gameplan. I've been with Gameplan for over 3 years now. But before that, I was actually working as an HR person in the pharmaceutical sector. So it was a really big career change on my part. But before that, about my thesis and how that sort of formed, I was really interested with sociology and gaming, and I really wanted to bridge that gap because I wanted to see more papers and research surrounding sociology and gaming. And I researched this, and there wasn't a lot going on in this regard because it's a rapidly evolving scene. And I thought I can maybe help with that. And when I started my master's degree in sociology, I deployed Irving Goffman's Dramaturgy, which we'll get into it a little bit more later in the episode. And I applied his dramaturgical approach to online gamers. And I will defend it this month, fingers crossed. But before that, I will be talking about it in this episode.
Yeah, and before we even get into Goffman and dramaturgy, I was super excited that you had a very similar passionate upbringing in the world of gaming yourself. I've been recently telling the story that I have, as of yesterday, a 5-year-old. And I think back to my first experiences gaming. And one of the things, maybe people haven't totally wrapped their head around yet is gaming is now passed down from generation to generation. Now that I have a 5-year-old, I recently somehow turned 40. I remember playing the very first Legend of Zelda with my father, right? He drove trucks for a living and he would pull me out of school. And that was like a big bonding experience for us when we were home, right? One of my first core memories was playing Legend of Zelda with my father. You fast forward now, however many years later, and with my own 5-year-old, we've done Breath of the Wild and now we're finishing up Tears of the Kingdom. So, gaming has kind of been in my DNA throughout my entire life. And I know that you have a similar background and passion for it, even that you learned English through gaming.
Yes, that's true. That's true. First of all, happy birthday to the little one.
Yes, I'll let him know.
But my journey with gaming started back when I was 5 or 6 years old, and it was a lot of years ago. I'm currently 27. One day I come home from school and there's this big white machine in the living room. It's a household computer, but I don't know what a computer is. So my dad says, this is a computer, this is what it does, but we don't have internet yet. So all I could do is just explore some settings, explore Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, presentations, nothing too exciting. But from that day on, I was fascinated. I started exploring the computer. I wanted to know to what extent I could use it, what it does. I became very tech literate among my classmates because I was engaging with the computer every day. And then fast forward to a couple of years later when we got access to internet and we have these CD games like Zoo Tycoon 2, Dino Island, I started playing age-appropriate games, which were actually gifted to me from my parents. And that was my first introduction to a very unique challenge that I've faced here in Turkey, the language barrier, because I was 7 or 8 years old trying to play these games, but they were in English and we didn't have Google Translate and I didn't know how to speak English. So all I could do was understand what anything meant from the context of the game. I mean, you can see it's a lion, so you know what a lion is, etc. But sometimes that would be such a challenge because you can't find everything in a dictionary, and sometimes you have to be fast because your animals need attention. So one day I remember we got this notification from Zoo Tycoon. I was playing with my sister. It said, Giraffe 9 is pregnant. We have no idea what pregnant meant. And you usually get notifications for very negative things. So they say like your customers don't like your zoo because everything's so expensive, or you need more benches, etc. So we thought this must be a negative thing. So I think giraffes are dying. And what we did was we released every pregnant animal back into the wild. And we wondered, why are we getting into baby animals? But yeah, as funny as it is, over the years, we understood what everything meant. And when the online games became a more popular video game genre, we started engaging with them, or we started not only reading and playing through a screen, but also speaking with people from around the world. And that really helped with language development because I haven't lived anywhere else. I have lived in Istanbul for my entire life, and basically through playing video games with random people online and many friendships later, here I am speaking English to a good degree, I want to say, but
Fantastic. No, absolutely wonderful. I would say basically a native speaker. And so you talk about the power of games. And then you fast forward, you were in the pharmaceutical, HR area. And then your passion for gaming took you into grad school and into Gameplan. And I mean, so what was it about the intersection of sociology, gender dynamics, personal experiences that kind of got you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been really passionate about games and gaming in general, gaming, esports. I loved watching esports as well, but I never really thought of it as something that I could do day to day as a career, because in my mind, you had to be a programmer or a game designer to work in the industry. So I went into the HR pathway because I graduated my bachelor's from international relations, and then I did a certification program in HR. And so I started working, but I was really happy. I was in despair. I was depressed. I was not happy. I really wanted to do something that I loved, but I thought, well, that's impossible. I don't do programming or game design. So what I did was I found another passion of mine, which was sociology. I was really interested in sociology and how, everything worked. And then I enrolled in a master's degree. And I thought maybe I could implement this passion of mine to my research, which was combining my favorite theoretician and my favorite passion, gaming. And I wanted to get the bridge between them. Because I was reading Irving Goffman's work, and this man lived back in 1950s and 60s. So, we didn't have games back in the day, but he does write about games, and he has an article called Fun in Games, written in 1961. And in that article, he talked about how games have the power to create worlds within worlds, and they have a special power, and it's an interesting aspect of life that we can explore with his analysis as well. So that really pushed me towards that. It gave me the confidence that I needed. So I combined both of them. And dramaturgy, in its original meaning, it means study of theater stage and its elements. But what Irving Goffman does is that he applies that to our everyday life and everyday life interactions, and says that throughout our interactions, all throughout the day, we have different personas that we adopt for different situations. So we put up a front at the front stage, and then we also have a backstage, we have a script, we have an audience. And I did that analysis on gamers.
Yeah. And I remember, I asked you to send me your thesis, and I was reading through it, and it was really just a neat way to think about gender dynamics and the roles of players when they play. And when I say roles, I'm not talking about DPS, I'm not talking about tank, but I'm talking about roles within the dynamics of their team, right? And I just thought it was a really cool piece that would make a great episode as we dive into, right, what we want this podcast to be is a podcast that matters and elevates the space and makes a difference. And so, I brushed up on my Goffman's dramaturgy, and, as you said, he talks about, being on a stage and playing a role. I put on my teacher hat, and then I come home and I'm a dad, and then I come to Gameplan and I'm product evangelist, and I'm a husband. And so we have these roles, and we play and prepare for them behind the scenes. We rehearse the script, and I'm going to myself, oh yeah, that's literally, when I was driving into school, running through how I'm going to deal with, what was going on in school that day, how I was going to teach and approach, the lesson and stuff like that. And so I had never really seen it applied to gaming. And what I loved about it, or why I think there's so much to break down there, is we know, and I'm always careful, right? I think both of us would agree that gaming has generally been a wonderful, positive experience. I think we would both agree that we have had negative experiences. And as a woman, you probably have much more negative experiences, right, than men do. But overall, right, it's one of those not all the time, but constant problems, issues that I think are worth discussing. And so, through Garden State Esports, we do a lot of parent outreach and advocacy and talking to principals and administrators about the value of gaming and esports. And one of the things that we constantly battle is this, demon of toxicity, right? Misogyny, racism, homophobia, that, yes, it's found everywhere in the world, but seemingly is more widespread, in gaming. And what I loved about what I was reading is it made it understandable, right? I spend a lot of time talking to various stakeholders who don't get it. They know that people are saying bad things, but they don't know why. They don't know how it's happening. They don't know how to talk to their kids about it. They don't know how to make sure their kids aren't part of the problem and instead are part of the solution. And so reading through, I'm going to myself, oh, this is it's just a neat way to think about it. And so I don't know if you want to dive into a little bit more of the dramaturgy. For me, the part that I really loved was where you talk about the different roles. But when you talk about the silent one, when you talk about the toxic one, building on the work of Bartle and the typography of gamers, you just made it so relatable in a way that I haven't seen before. And so help our listeners understand, right, what the connection is between Goffman's dramaturgy and what it has to do with gender dynamics and the roles that we play.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was creating the gamer types, I had to do a really thorough literature research to see what was done in the subject area before. And to my surprise, this actually dates back to 1996 with Richard Bartle's work on multi-user dungeons. But when you look at that game, it's very different to the games that we have today. It's text-based game that you type in commands. Maybe you played it, I don't know, but it's very different. No, no, no offense.
Only old,
but
fine. I'll let it slide.
but then as I was researching, I've seen that this player typology studies evolved with the gaming scene. So in 2007, we have a new survey called Daedalus survey by Nikki, and then we have another survey of player typologies that is called Brain Hacks in 2013, which is a neurobiological gamer type. So I was reading through all of these, and they're all super intertwined with each other. But what they don't look at is that they look at the motivation for play. So they look at why these players are engaging with the game. But no one really looked at player interactions within the game. So what I did is that I used my own experience, did a really thorough literature research, and through some discourse analysis as well, I have combined all of them plus some Goffman sprinkled on top, and I have created 4 new gamer types, which are the toxic one, the chatter, the silent one, and the shot caller, which I'm sure anyone who has ever played a game before, online game before, has met these 4 types. And where it comes handy is that you get to understand why these players engage in certain behaviors. Because if you do which I did, if you do a dramaturgical analysis in player types, you see that the front stage is the game itself or the match itself, depending on the game. Okay. So these players, depending on the front that they want to put, they select their persona, which is the script, and then they start put up a performance at the front stage, which is the game. And the backstage is, of course, any areas where you are not playing the game. So it could be actually the lobby of the game, or it could be where you are playing the game. So, for instance, this room could be my backstage as well. But it helps you understand why people engage in certain behaviors, because a lot of these player types reflect wider societal beliefs and values and norms, right? Especially the toxic type, because in the toxic types, I have a subsection where I go into how these player types can carry some misogynistic beliefs and how they could engage in harassment behavior towards women gamers.
And so we talk about the front of the stage, the way that they engage with the game, and the roles. Again, not talking about like DPS and tank, but talking about the roles that they take almost in the team or the team dynamics, right?
Yeah.
And so let's briefly run through them, because I think where we're going and what I was excited about what you were writing is we can't solve this problem, right, of toxicity if we don't understand why, right? Yeah. And yes, obviously there are larger social and societal issues at play. I always like to say, you know, when I go onto my town's Facebook page, it's not these teenagers who are calling each other names and stuff like that, right? These are adults. And when we talk about gaming being one of those spaces where generally kids still know more than their parents, even though we're seeing it passed down more and more, or, you know, sometimes even the parents engaging in the behaviors themselves. You know, when I think it's kind of a neat way to start to think about the kids, you know, let's put our educator hat on, right? When we interact with the kids that we teach, to understand that, you know, they have a stage that they're on, right? I was sharing with you when we were preparing for the show, one of the most difficult teaching times for me is when I was teaching middle schoolers who were trying to impress their friends, because they would do and say and act a certain way because they were only concerned about making their friends laugh. And I always had preached from a classroom management perspective, when I would take those kids and I would separate them from their audience and have them come out into the hallway or stay after class, they were a completely different person, right? Or when, you know, if we ever had to address something with their parents and their parents had to come in, they were a completely different person in front of their parents. So this idea, right, that we have folks on a stage, and as a teacher of, you know, almost 20 years, I understand the stage that my students are on, but I never thought to apply it to gaming. And so we said the shot caller, the chatter, the silent one, and the toxic one. Take me through each one. What is a shot caller?
Absolutely. Well, the shot caller or the in-game leader is someone who takes on a leading role in a team. But in order to do that, they would have to know the game really well, because if they're calling the shots, they have to be aware of not only their teammates, but game mechanics and how to play that game. But they also have to be really aware of how every team member plays, because we're talking about random people that they play with here. So they tend to be really observant, and they tend to be the in-game leaders, conflict resolvers in that sense.
Or can we even apply it to, I know that you, like myself, are a big Overwatch fan. Because they're playing kind of random pickup games, can we also see as the shot caller who understands the meta and, what the tracer should be doing versus the tank and stuff like that? So a shot caller is almost a veteran of the game who understands how the best way to play the game is, even if they don't understand necessarily who they're playing with. If you're a DPS, if you're a tracer in Overwatch, you should be playing this way, and we want to play that way because, we're all here to win.
Yeah, definitely.
So we go shot caller, and then talk to me about the chatter.
The chatter or the socializer, I couldn't decide on one, so I use both of them in the thesis because I love both of them, is a player who approaches gaming as a communicative medium. The act of gaming itself is actually like a secondary activity to them, because they approach it as somewhere, an area that they can socialize, and then they can make new friends. They sort of like the mediator of the group. So if there's a conflict that's kind of heating up in the team, they try to stop that. They try to lighten the mood. They try to make new friends. So they are definitely team members that you want when you're playing online games.
Okay. And then we have where I think that we'll probably spend most of our time in this discussion is we have the silent one and the toxic one. So talk to me about the silent one, a little bit, how, at least in what I was reading and the way I interpret it in my head, is somewhat related to the toxic one. And then I know some of this was born out of your senior thesis in talking to female Turkish pro esports players and how they handled toxicity, right? So talk to me about those two roles, the silent one, the toxic one, and then if you can kind of wrap it in this idea of the gender dynamics that you saw.
Yeah, gladly. So really short, the silent one is a player that refuses to engage with the game in a communicative way. They could use non-verbal ways to communicate. They could maybe, pointing their mouse up and down, saying like yes or no, or they could be using emotes or the ping system, but they refuse to talk. That could be due to many reasons. One of them that they could be escaping harassment. They don't want to be harassed by a possible teammate, or that they just want to enjoy their games freely, peacefully. They don't want to just talk. That could be one of the reasons, but they just refuse to engage and on the chat. But a toxic player, is a gamer who approaches gaming with a very toxic mindset. They approach everything with a toxic mindset, and as a result of that, they tend to disrupt the gameplay. So the reason that I included this gamer type is that it's really prominent in other literatures as well. So for instance, Bartle has the killer type, who's very ambitious, and sometimes the toxic type can be motivated by these ambitious feelings of ranking up, winning the match, etc. But that they could also carry a lot of misogynistic feelings and beliefs towards women gamers. And so how that ties in with the other thing that you talked about, which was a senior class project that we did a couple of years ago. It was feminist critical readings class, and we were tasked with conducting semi-structured interviews with other people in a topic that we like. And I really wanted to see if I could I wanted to see if female players in Turkey respond to this harassment, and if they do, how do they decide if they're going to respond or not, and what they go through. I wanted to see. So I interviewed 6 female gamers from Turkey, aged between 18 to 25, and they were all playing, Valorant, Fortnite, Overwatch, those online FPS games like that. And what I found was really interesting. So this research, I got the idea from another research by Amanda Coates. She actually has a book on it now called Gaming Sexism, but before this was an article about coping mechanisms for harassment by female gamers. And in that she talked about some strategies that women deploy. And that was the research that was conducted in the US. So I thought, is this the same for Turkish players, or is this not a global experience? And what I found was almost identical results with players from here. So the language didn't matter, or the region didn't matter. The coping mechanisms and the things that they said was almost identical. And I want to quickly summarize what they said. So if they are going to respond to hate, a very important determinant was if they are playing good, if they believe that they're performing well, they feel like they have the right to speak back to that hate. They have the right to call that out. But if they feel like they're not playing really well or performing well, they resort to being silent and not engaging with them at all. So that was one of the strategies that would turn them into a silent type.
Mm-hmm.
Or they talked about how they would mask their gender, they would use voice changing modules, or they would try to educate them. And I also had a toxic type myself. She mocked them back, she harassed them back. So she had a very different strategy for dealing with that. The environment must have become so much more toxic with those kind of interactions. But one of the other mutual things that they said, that they were getting these harassment speeches from young boys aged 10 to 15.
Mm-hmm.
And at first they would try to educate them, but after a while they get tired of it. So they just resort to not, speaking at all.
Right, because it's something that we hear is the victim having to educate the abuser about why they shouldn't be an abuser. And we see that, I think, in a bunch of different forms. I shared with you, I get invited to do a lot of speaking, and to the point where I'm almost turning down. Sometimes I get asked to do panels on women in gaming. And they ask, what can we do about it? And for a while, I was talking about the fact that Garden State Esports made an all-girls and marginalized genders league called Valkyrie, and the impact that Valkyrie had. I shared stories, right? Similar to I shared with you, is that, through starting our all-girls league, we brought our female and female identifying population from 4% to 20% of the league. So I would say roughly, maybe 500 to 600 girls in Garden State Esports are now, gaming with us, even though we know they game just as much as their male counterparts. And even, I would share stories about, specifically, there's a very powerful woman in esports who I know, who was sharing very similar to the girls that have shared in Garden State Esports, that when they are gaming and they experience toxicity, it really saps all the love out of the game for them for the most part, or they do fight back in certain ways. But it's tough to continue to go to and watch panels where we all know that something is wrong and we all know that we have to do something, and then the panel wraps and like this podcast episode wraps with like, okay, cool, we know that women are poorly treated in gaming, cool, like we all know that, right? And so what I wanted to continue to dive into is how you have positioned some of this so that we can at least start to formulate a game plan, right? If we're going to have Scholastic Esports, if we're going to be, right, on Gameplan, we have a middle school esports course, right? I taught middle school for 7 years. The ability to be a positive influence on boys 10 to 15 years old is really important, right? Because I also was a middle school STEM teacher. And here's the thing that maybe people don't realize, and I hope that they do. The same boys that were giving my girls a hard time on my esports team were the same boys that were giving girls a hard time in my STEM class. And we know by about 8th grade that most girls have kind of given up on STEM. And if you go and read some of the accounts of the women who stick with it and they navigate, some of these STEM spaces, jobs, professions, degrees, the toxicity seems to follow them. So to me, right, being able to address this, being able to incorporate this into curriculum, being able to take the educator, right, who at least in the United States, education is still a predominantly female profession, and to have them be able to help influence, right, 10 to 15-year-old young boys, which, or even the other side of this, right? We have seen what happens when young men need a strong male role model, and there's kind of a vacuum there, right? Where your Andrew Tates of the world fill that strong, vacuum that could better be filled by a strong male role model who, helps them understand you shouldn't talk anybody like that. And even I shared with you, I have wrestled and coached wrestling and football and stuff my entire life. And, one of the stats that's most interesting that we see in Garden State Esports and throughout the space is about half of these kids that are participating in esports in their schools have never participated in a sport or a team function before. So I remember growing up that my coach taught me, what happens when you yell at the ref, what happens when you yell at your opponent, what happens when you curse on the field, what happens when you throw your helmet, what happens through your headgear. Well, a lot of these kids are now coming into this gaming space where being part of a team, and they haven't necessarily had the team training. So a lot of this too is, I think, that we can dive into potentially some solutions. And I know specifically for you, you were sharing not just your experience, but also the experience of one of the players, Geguri, from I believe she was in South Korea. I forget the name of the Overwatch team.
Shanghai Dragons.
Shanghai Dragons. And so whether it's a young girl playing in school, whether it's a professional like Geguri, I mean, walk us through kind of what happened to her and how that's an example of kind of the toxic ones. From the article and from the story, she seemed like a silent one, and she didn't want the spotlight. And this also kind of goes into what we'll mention too is, again, how do we help educate and help lift up the space and the kids that we teach and stuff like that? Because in sharing the story about Geguri, you also did a great job pointing out, which I didn't even realize, the casters and the event staff was part of the problem too.
Yeah.
So walk me through that.
Absolutely. I love sharing this story. So Geguri was the first female pro player in Overwatch League back in 2018. She joined Shanghai Dragons, and that was my first, experience seeing a female player in a male team. It was a mixed team. I was really excited. We were all watching, tuned in. That could be us one day. We were playing ranked with my friends too. And I got to wonder, where did she come from? What's her background? And I researched her. And back in 2016, she was competing in an amateur league for Overwatch again. And she got accused of cheating. She was a tank player and she was playing incredible. And she had very good aim. I mean, understandably, she's a pro player.
Right.
But she got accused of cheating. And the response to that was really surprising, because I would have thought they would say, she's not cheating, please stop the online hatreds and stuff. But she has gotten a lot of threats, not only from random people online, but from other players on the amateur league as well. They would say, if she's not cheating, we will leave the team, or if you guys don't do anything about this, we'll dox her or like go to her house.
Because it was also the other pro players from the other teams who were accusing her as well. So it was like a whole bandwagon situation.
Definitely. Everyone jumped on it as well. And she was 16 years old, by the way, when this was happening. So I was reading and I thought, well, I'm sure Overwatch League or, the broadcasters or, people probably intertwined, but that didn't happen. What happened was they conducted a stream where you could see her keyboard, her mouse, her screen, and herself. She seemed to be very uncomfortable. So she was wearing a mask. She didn't want to really display herself. She seems to be a very introverted person too. But what they did was that they conducted that stream and told us, well, she's not cheating. There you go. Stop the harassment. And I was really surprised, because I thought there would have been some consequences for team players that have accused her and jumped on the hate bandwagon. But no, they just addressed it with a stream. This proves that she's not cheating, right? And then she continued on to joining the pro scene. But the reason that I mentioned broadcasters was that at that time, when she was accused of cheating, one of the casters invited her to the stage to address this. And she seems very uncomfortable with that. She seems like she doesn't really want to make a statement because her hand is shaking. And she just says, I don't cheat. I don't even know how to cheat. I don't know how to do that. And I'm not cheating. So that left me speechless, and I stopped watching esports for a while because everything about esports at that time was telling me that this is not for you, because the casters were male, teams were male, audience was predominantly male. Now that I change a very positive, now that I see a very positive change, but back then this was more normalized, because if something were like this to happen now, I feel like it would have been addressed a lot better, which actually brings me to another instance that I'm going to tie in with something else really quickly. I was watching a CSGO tournament, and there was a little kid who, I would say 11 years old tops, and he was holding a lovely sign that said "Love to everyone." It was a big sign, and the cameras were shooting him. And then as the cameras were shooting him, he turns that around and it says some really bad swear words. And I was shocked. I thought, there must have been a delay in the stream, but apparently not. But shoutcasters laughed at it. Everybody laughed at it. Audience laughed at it, and they just left it there. So how did he get that sign in? Where are the parents? Where are the event organizers, broadcasters? Why are they laughing? And that also left me with some questions about the responsibility of event organizers and managers, of their responsibility to not contribute to that sort of behavior. Because again, it all comes down to, I guess, the difference between gaming and esports. Because gaming, I can just turn on my computer and start gaming even if I'm like 6 years old, and there's no guarantee who I'm going to game with. So I start growing within that random gaming culture that I observe throughout gaming with random people. And the worst things that I see happening that don't get addressed becomes a part of my norm and understanding of gaming communities too. So I tend to become more toxic because that's what I see happening. That's the norm for me. But if we take a look at esports, especially scholastic esports, then kids don't play with random people, but they do the structured, organized, supervised form of play that fosters their community side. It teaches them about, digital citizenship, sportsmanship, gaming ethics. So you start breaking the cycle of hatred and toxicity there. That's how you tackle the problem, especially in young kids.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember when you were telling me her story and you shared the CSGO story, and even when you were retelling them in my head, I'm just kind of going like, oh, because there's so many things that this hits on that I think matters, right? Again, and if we go back to this lens of being this intersection of esports and school, right? Education. We have Gregory, who was a silent one, and we have the toxic ones. And in my head, I said automatically, okay, how are we making sure the outspoken ones, right, which are your socializers, with are your shot callers, how are we as educators, how are we in the space arming them to be to be upstanders and not bystanders, right? And I shared with you, at least in the United States, right, we have this initiative around bullying and how, toxic people are always, going to be toxic. However, it is everybody's duty to stand up when they see something like that, and let folks know it's not okay, right? Because with gaming and on the internet, right, you have anonymity, you have an audience, and that automatically, can sometimes lead to people acting or taking a role on that they would not normally take. Like I said, a kid would act a certain way when trying to impress their friends versus in front of their parents versus, online, right? People taking on this role. And so to, number one, go back and think about us as educators, right? What are we trying to do? Well, can we make sure that those of us that are brave enough, right, and using your examples, right? I would make the argument, and feel free to disagree. You're the expert. That the socializers and the shot callers are probably the ones who are most comfortable speaking up.
Definitely, yeah.
Right, and so you go from there, and when you're talking about this kid who had the sign with the curse words on the back, and we, even mentioned, well, that sign had to probably, the kid was what, 10, had to be okayed by the parents, had to get through the event organizers. And then, I kind of get it. Like, I do a bunch of live stuff for Garden State Esports, and sometimes things happen and you don't know how to react in the moment and stuff like that. But to the best of my knowledge, in either one of these situations, at no point did anybody ever kind of step up and speak up and say, hey, we're sorry for the way that we treated Geggery, and we made her prove that she's not a cheater, instead of just having her back from the beginning. Or, hey, I wanted to apologize in that last segment. I laughed about, this kid having that sign, when in reality, that's not what we want this space to be about. And again, thinking the bigger stage that we are trying to put esports on, to have that in our classrooms, to have that in the curriculums that we're using. I know from Garden State Esports, right? We have curriculum around being an event organizer, being a broadcaster, right? One of the things that I preach to schools is, once you have a competitive team, the next most important thing to add is broadcasting. Making sure then that in our broadcasting training, we have stuff around, okay, what do you do if something like this happens? What is your panic button go-to thing if somebody's toxic in the chat, or somebody does something toxic in game? So it's always almost like just keeping us in check as the adults, which means, number one, we have to know about the space, and number two, we have to know and arm kids with how to do it. I think is super valuable. And so it's just so neat to me, the way that these roles help me, at least me, and I'm hoping the folks that are going to listen and are watching, helps them think about what they're doing in the esports world and what they're doing with their students when it comes to, okay, even one thing that you mentioned about the boy and the sign, it's a learned behavior. Well, how are we helping folks unlearn those behaviors, or at least understand that it's not socially acceptable? And so I think, too, we often forget the power that somebody standing up for somebody else can have. I think we often forget the power of, being, I went to a university here in the United States. I went to St. Joe's. And, I forgot a lot of stuff. But the one thing I never forgot about St. Joe's was the motto, which is to be a man or a woman for others. Right. So when somebody stands up and speaks up, it makes a big difference. But it's not always something that happens naturally. It may be the socializer, the shot caller, who can have that happen naturally. But we have to educate our kids to help them potentially stand up. And going back to what I was saying about the impact it can make, is you shared with me a story about somebody who stood up for you. And, it seemed like a little thing when you were telling it to me, but then to hear how it meant so much to you, made me think about all those little times in my day, or which makes me feel happy as a father, that I constantly am talking to my boys about how they treat others and stuff like that. What was the impact that it had on you?
Definitely. So this incident that I shared with you prior to the podcast happened, I want to say 2016. So when I was first starting to play Overwatch and ranked, and I was playing only myself, and there was no one else involved. So it was kind of difficult to decide if I'm going to speak or not, because the space wasn't really welcoming at first. One day I was playing ranked, I'm alone, and I'm playing the most hated hero called Symmetra in ranked. So I'm already getting harassed just for the choice of Symmetra. But it made me think that I'm already getting bullied, so maybe I shouldn't speak because I'm a girl, and they will understand that I'm a girl and bully me further. So one day that harassment got really heated, and one of the players on my team was really harassing me and bullying me to the point I teared up. I got really angry, but I got really sad too, and I didn't know what to do. I just sat there with my sadness playing the game. And then one of my teammates called this person out on their behavior. Why are you doing this? Stop, you're disrupting it. We reported it. You're going to get kicked out of the game if you, continue this behavior. And I was really thankful, but I was hesitant to say thank you as well, because I thought maybe they defended me because they thought I was a guy. So if I say thank you, they'll understand I'm a girl and they'll just be toxic to me too. I said thank you, and to my surprise, they said you're welcome, and they start writing on the mat chat so that our opponents can learn what's going on in our team. We say that we have a griefer, which means that someone is on purpose trying to make us lose because we have a girl. And we decide on drawing on the game. So we just join each other on the control point so no one can win. And for 5 or 6 minutes straight, we just hang out at the point to draw the match so no one loses. And the toxic player does not get what they want. But it's the difference between being a bystander versus, what was it, the term you called? Upstander?
Upstander, yeah. We'll use that sometimes.
Upstander, yeah. It may seem like a very minor thing, but I think the importance of it comes from everybody can recognize toxic behaviors. I mean, no one is blind. We see and we recognize these behaviors. You know, we hear you, we understand you. But are you doing anything about it? Are you acting up? Are you addressing the problem, or are you remaining silent and becoming a part of the problem? So, although it may seem like a very minor problem, very minor thing to do, it's impacted me massively, and I started being an advocate for this as well, how to stand up for others when they can't, because let's be honest, not everyone can stand up for themselves, and it's okay. If you consider yourself a shot caller, a leader, a socializer in that sense, definitely stand up for others.
Yeah, and I think too is in this world, and you know, again, drawing on my experience both in the classroom and through Garden State Esports, one of the things that I've realized is that there's a lot of different ways to be an upstander, right? And so I think about, number one, the power in that, how that made you feel. You know, all these years later, you still smile and talk about it as a fond core memory. And I maybe think that the person who stood up for you, it might not even have been a big deal to them. They probably don't necessarily, but it made all the difference to you. And so when I think about you guys standing on that control point and that, you know, that toxic griefer not getting what they wanted, you know, you'd like to think maybe they learned their lesson. But to me, the strength is in the numbers of people who, you know, stood up there. So you think about, you know, the shot caller and the socializer who was brave enough to push back on his own teammate. But then the other people on the other team, when he said, hey, look, we got a griefer giving, you know, one of our female players a hard time, they were like, cool, that's doing the right thing here is more important than winning the match. And everybody just hung out, you know? And so when we think about what we want to do as educators, if we're going to be in this gaming and scholastic space and esports, and I understand that there's, again, other areas and other, you know, places and professions that this happens, but we have to, you know, clean up our house, right? If everybody takes care of their house, right, then maybe the garbage won't spill out onto the street. And this idea that we can empower kids, right, the 10, 11, 12, you know, not only the boys, but also the girls, to get them to understand and to get them to, you know, see the whole dynamic, right? Everybody has a role in this. You know, and even in again, go back to my experience with GSE, when we have every team, one of the requirements to join Garden State Esports is you set up a team charter. And we do training for coaches, club advisors, right? The educators in our league, how to create safe, inclusive spaces. And then they in turn work with their kids, and we have a no toxicity rule. And even looking at the data where, you know, I surveyed our kids a few months ago, and you know, something like 80% of them have been the victim of at least, you know, one toxic experience in the last 3 months. Whereas, you know, when asked about toxicity on their esports team at school, it was less than 2%. And so we know that this stuff matters. And so I think it's just a really cool way to think about improving the space. And that's part of why I was so excited to read about your paper, and thank you for helping me think about all of this in a new way.
Yeah, thank you so much for reading it, actually, and finding a lot of resonance with your own experience as well. I agree with everything that you said. You obviously have a lot more experience than me. But everything that you said and do in GC and Gameplan contributes to breaking the cycle of toxicity in gaming, and for creating more a different type of gamers for the new generation. But if we come down to solutions, what can we do to address toxicity or dismantle toxicity, which is the title of the show, to me, one of the most important aspects is the factor that we are really anonymous in online spaces, because there's an effect called online disinhibition effect, and it says that when we are engaging in online communication, we tend to lose ourselves, and we resort to conforming to group beliefs, and we don't know how to act, so we do things that we wouldn't normally do in real life. And so that problem is completely gone when there's scholastic esports involved. So having esports to some degree in a school, be it extracurricular activity, co-curricular activities, club, after school activity, anything, that changes the game massively, because not only they get to learn about, again, I'm reiterating what you said and what I said a couple minutes ago, but they have stronger role models, code of conduct, digital citizenship, etc. So these players are growing up to be different. But there also is another problem now. What do we do about the existing players? They're not young men. We're talking about grown-ups here. What are we going to do? Are we going to enroll in a scholastic esports program? Hope, yeah, I wished, but that's not the case. So my opinion on that is the story that I told you, as players, we went to the control point, we drove the game, so no one won. That's really interesting, because why are we as players are acting on it? Why didn't we have the necessary tools in the game to address this issue? So for game developers, definitely implement more robust moderation tools and empower and reward positive behavior. And definitely event organizers also should be a great role models as well, because esports tournaments, do you know how many people watch them? Millions. So they have a big chance and a platform to influence many other people.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that everybody has a role. Publishers, more robust moderation tools, even starting to explore things like the use of AI and checking chats and audio logs, which I know some developers are are working on. And I try to stay in my lane as an educator. That I think and I hope is the primary solution, because if we think too is publishers banning players goes against the business model. If they ban a player, they're not buying skins. So in some ways, I think that publishers and organizations are disincentivized from doing anything about it, because it hurts the bottom line, right? And maybe that's why it's so prevalent. So what I like to think is, if we reach them now, scholastic esports in middle school, scholastic esports in high school, right? Esports electives, gaming classes. Well, then maybe when these kids go and found the next publishing company, when they develop the next video game, when they are the next, professional esports team, the core to their DNA will be, what Miss Smith taught me when I started playing esports in 6th grade, or, what Mr. Johnson taught me when I went out for the team, and Mr. Johnson, even though I may be trans, created a safe, inclusive space where I felt welcome, and I'm still friends with those kids that I met through esports. And I think that is really powerful. And I think as we, continue to grow in the space, I think we need to start to lean into taking action. I think borrowing and using some of this bystander intervention training, where we teach kids to be upstanders, is really important. I think that we have to understand, to what you taught me, Pia, is the different roles that people take in a game. Again, going back to that scenario of everybody going to the control point, right? That one person was the upstander who spoke out, but the other folks were upstanders who silently agreed to just go stand on the control point. So, I am somebody who's pretty outspoken, but I can imagine, and I try to incorporate both into my classroom and Garden State Esports, different curricular points or teaching points where if you're silent, if you're shy, what I would even tell my kids is just telling the club advisor, hey, I overheard so-and-so saying this to this person. So that way the club advisor can address it, right? The adult can address it. Because it's not always up to you to have to solve the problem, right? But at least if somebody is made aware, then maybe they could solve the problem, and it's their job to solve the problem. But even ways, I remember reading some literature out of, we have Rutgers University in New Jersey, who does a lot in the bystander intervention training space. And when we were developing our curriculum, it was even letting folks know who are more shy, that just by nodding when somebody spoke up to somebody else, or just by saying, yeah, when somebody spoke up to somebody else, like you're creating that team dynamic, that group dynamic that you were talking about, that is letting that person know, right, what they're doing is not okay. And then I think, I can think of dozens of experiences as an educator where I was called down to the guidance counselor's office, where these kids were having online experiences, or, one of the schools I taught at was a very affluent, high-performing school. One of the first fist fights in years was over something somebody said in Fortnite, and it carried over to the school. So also making sure that we're arming educators, to be able to address these issues and understand this space, and we're educating parents. And I think everybody has a role, and even helping those students who are displaying the toxic behavior, right, understand. I taught a unit when I had my esports elective about trash talking, and how if you research trash talking, it makes the person doing the trash talking play better, but it also makes the opposing team that's being trash talked play better. And at the same time, it makes the trash talker's team play worse. So it's a net negative. So understanding that toxic behaviors not only hurt the people around you, but actually hurt the person who is toxic. And so being able to dive in, whether it's through a counselor, through an educator, through a scholastic esports class or program, well, why are those kids, having that type of behavior? Where does that feeling come from? What need is not being met in that kid's life, that they have to go out and hurt others, Because again, I've played sports my whole life, and I hate losing more than anybody I know. But I don't start attacking, saying racist things, homophobic and misogynist just to hurt somebody, because I know that's not the way to go about it. But I also have been taught by, positive male role models and coaches that I've had in my life. So, I think this, and I hope this is the start of a longer series and a longer conversation, Pia, that you join me on, because I was just so excited to meet somebody as passionate about gaming, and who was doing a lot of this work and research that, to me, just helped me think about all of this in a whole new way. And I'm hoping, you'll make your master's thesis available after you defend it, or so others can read it. We can attach it to the show notes and stuff like that. But, if we're going to solve the problem, it's going to take people like you doing the research and taking it seriously as a problem that can be solved, maybe not completely, but in one way or the other. And I'll leave it to you for the last word. What else do you want people to take away? What else do you want to share?
Well, first of all, thank you so much to you and the entirety of the Gameplan team for being so encouraging and giving me a platform, a chance to speak about what I've done and my own story. I think my story highlights the global power of esports in gaming, because this is something that I've done with my hobby of gaming. So I've learned language, I've gotten some transferable skills that I've used in the world of HR, and then I swapped to Gameplan. So it shows you that if a lot more students and kids have access to this, not only they'll be better equipped to deal with harassment and navigate that space, but they will be also less likely to be the toxic type of players, and they get to acquire these skills that I've gotten over the years myself, alone, gaming in my room, unsupervised. So I hope that my story resonated with some or inspired some, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about the profound impact, right? Toxic players go on to start toxic companies that have toxic workplaces that require that we need an HR department, in some sense. So, no, like I said, the Game Plan for Education podcast, we want to elevate the space. We want to tackle tough, interesting, important conversations. around the intersection of education and esports and using the power of gaming for good. And so, Pia, I don't think that you could have kicked off a better episode than our very first episode. And like I said, you are far beyond a moderator in my eyes. I look forward to building this podcast with you.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
All right. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for watching. You can check us out at gameplan.com and all the socials where we will be posting the podcast, cutting up the videos, and all kinds of good stuff. So looking forward to continuing the conversation and learning and growing with everybody as part of the Game Plan for Education podcast. So, Pia, thank you. Everybody listening, watching, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.